Welcome to another episode of the Your Sports Discussion podcast. Today's a special episode in which we have Josh from Evolving Hockey. He's one of the creators. He hopped on the podcast to answer some questions and explain their new player cards on Evolving Hockey. At that point, I will hop in so direct you guys to the YouTube video to have the graphic help you. But you guys are more than free to stick around on the podcast too if you can understand it that way. Besides that, make sure to check out my previous video with Josh in which he explained some of the analytics that are available on his website. And let's set the show on the road. All right, before we get into some questions, why don't you introduce yourself, as in what do you do, who you are, and your work, just in case for anyone who doesn't know.
Yeah, so my name's Josh. I'm one of the duo that runs the at Evolving Wild Twitter account, and also me and my brother Luke are the creators and maintainers of the website evolving-hockey.com. That's basically just do data, stats work, modeling, projections, kind of anything that you name it, or anything that you can think of regarding NHL work, specifically pretty much NHL, although a little bit of prospects here and there. But I try to let the prospect pros kind of deal with that. So that's I think a quick summary.
Evolving Hockey is a great site. I recommend it for everyone. They provide lots of useful statistics that, in my opinion, are very useful for analysis. And I know that you and your brother spent a lot of time preparing for the season. So why don't you just give some insight into what goes into your guys' preparation? How do you guys prepare for the start of a new regular season each year?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. It's a lot generally, because the thing that happens if you there's a couple, it's kind of the standard. I think a lot of websites or sports sites that work or provide data like this, even the big ones. But for more of kind of the smaller level ones like we're on, which is just Luke and I basically kind of maintaining it. A lot of the work that we do in season is just making sure the data and the models and everything works right, and making sure the users that, a lot of that kind of maintenance, just day-to-day stuff. And so it kind of eats up a lot of time in terms of just being able to work on anything new, or that would be long-term. So the off season, a lot of the time we'll throughout the course of a season kind of come up with a list, or we'll have a list that gets longer and longer as the off season approaches, about things that we would like to do that we might not be able to do or have the time to do, or maybe even the data's not there because the season isn't done. During the season, we want to do that in the off season, because when there's no games, and so there's a few things that we have to do each off season. And one of those, which is kind of towards actually the end of the season, is something that we generally, a lot of people use, and we've kind of, it's one of, we try to maintain it and work on the model, but our contract projections are something that we also get ready for free agency in the off season. So that's a little earlier. We'll do some playoff stuff here and there, but that's kind of already done in season. And then as the actually preparing for the new season is generally any kind of new models or new metrics or pages or visualizations that we had planned that we worked on. We need to make sure that we can get those added to the site. So this last off season, we were working on a few things. The two big ones were Luke added player cards, I guess we both did, but those were kind of on his end. And then I was working on our kind of GAR projection system for individual or WAR. Our WAR or GAR stat was kind of the big one that those are the two big ones. Just some other back end stuff, but it really, especially this last off season, was a bit of a I think a wild card, just because of it wasn't a normal off season, because it happened later. It was kind of unclear about when the season was going to start, because it's a little easier in past off seasons when okay, the season ends, playoffs are done, there's no games, there's nothing that we need to really maintain. So now we have from here until the start of the season, early October generally. This last off season was kind of up in the air as to when the season was going to start, so it was a little harder to kind of plan for things. So when they actually kind of announced it was going to start mid-January, we were kind of definitely in crunch time to get everything together by the start of the season. But luckily, a lot of the stuff on our site, at least the day-to-day stuff, has kind of been there for a bit. So there's not a lot of new things that we necessarily need to, or major new things, but those are the two of the big ones. So it's once it's out, then it's kind of making sure that they work and that there's nothing that breaks. It's kind of always the number one thing, but just a lot of testing on our end, like back end testing that doesn't really get out there or isn't really on our site. Because we work with models or kind of en masse, so across the whole season, or I guess not the season, but across the whole league. Just ensuring that what we did or what we're doing kind of makes sense, like en masse, and that there aren't any weird edge cases and that people aren't going to find stuff that we then need to kind of go and fix. So a lot of that stuff is really what is kind of goes into preparation. Sorry, that was a bit of a long answer. I hope that kind of covered what you were looking for.
No worries. That was actually a really good answer, and I can imagine it's very hectic for you guys, especially with that whole entire not knowing when the season is starting. Oh, the season's starting right now, or like really quickly, and then that probably created lots of chaos for you guys on your site.
Yeah, we were kind of, I mean, they had announced it. It was more, there was a lot of skepticism around actually, were they actually going to start, when they said they were. And it seemed like we were kind of hoping it was going to be a little later so that we might have a little bit more time to just not have as much kind of chaos, but that's when it was. And we were able to get stuff done. We just had a couple, probably really the 2 weeks leading up to the season were just kind of every day constantly. And then every weekend was full of, just working. And I think the other thing that's interesting that we are still, and a lot of other public analysts are still, I think, or people who kind of maintain models are trying to figure out is how we're going to deal with these two back-to-back shortened seasons. They kind of present issues just because generally every season is the same, 82 games, it's the same length, there's the same off season. And so that kind of gets built in or baked in certain ways to the different models. But when you have shortened seasons like this, in the lockout season in 2012, 2013, we still have to, a lot of modeling, you kind of need to prorate that season to make it, for it to be in line with the other seasons when you do any kind of modeling. And we actually chose to hold off on redoing our expected goals and WAR models, which we generally would redo in the off season with the prior data. It's not the most, it's not the longest process, but just adding in a prior season. But we also like to make changes too. But just given kind of the uncertainty right now with what the seasons were going to look like and how the data was going to come in and that stuff, we're still kind of trying to grapple with what we're going to do with these two seasons. Do we treat them as two separate seasons and prorate to be full 82 games, or do they maybe get combined into one long season and see what that looks like? So I think those are some other interesting questions that get brought up with the new structure as it is, at least for this season.
Yeah, this actually leads me very nicely into my next question is how my next question is going to be about how do you guys think the statistics like in these next shortened seasons are going to be different in terms of the different models like RAPM and WAR on your guys' website?
Yeah, I mean, that's like what I was talking about a little bit, but that specifically, I think, is definitely also one of the things that we're kind of, I don't think it's really an issue yet because the season's still young, but one of the interesting things right now is the fact that that there's 4 divisions and all teams only play in those divisions. Because in the past, in a full season, even if if the team is playing within their division or mostly in their conference, they still play games against the entire league, which the way that with several of the models work is that they benefit in a way by having as many matchups or as many different players that players are able to play against. So in a normal season, I think a player might play against like 600 different players, if they play a full season, but they're only going to be playing. We're kind of in the middle of, it's still too early to really look at this properly, but that is one of the things that could potentially lead to an issue where we might have some biases in the divisions where the division strength actually impacts our ability to maybe keep all of the evaluation on the same level for all players or teams. So we're kind of in the preliminary stages of looking at is number one, if that actually is an issue, because there's a possibility that the general strength of all of the divisions is kind of equal. And so we already are going to have some issues because we're not going to have a full season, which generally more data is better, but we haven't quite figured out the best way. We have kicked around the idea of, at least for the team, for some of our team metrics, just running, instead of doing it for where the whole league is included, we have actual individual models for each of the divisions to see if there is actually any divergence there. But again, splitting the data out into smaller pieces like that also could potentially introduce some, I don't know, some kind of standard statistical issues like collinearity or maybe some other, I don't know, like just some other issues that we need to look into. So I guess I don't really have a good answer for what we're going to do, but it's something that we're kind of kicking around about how we would fix it. Or if there is a problem, I should say. It's possible that there isn't really an issue at all and everything looks fine. So
Yeah, I can imagine because I feel like some of the obvious things that like got popped up like in and around communities, like for example, Austin Matthews being able to basically rack up goals against Ottawa. Well, the Leafs have struggled with that, but like Pedersen, for example, is able. He seemed like he was having a slow start to the season, then gets 3 games against the Sens straight away, and I feel like that might be an advantage of players and like talented players in the North Division would have over other divisions in the league. You know what I'm saying?
yeah, exactly. And I think that's one of the other things too, is that because it's like, some people were saying, oh, the North is going to look, North is a great division or the Central is a great division or whatever. I mean, not the Central, I guess, but maybe the East, for instance. And like, I was going into the season, we were kind of the opinion that the West was going to be the worst, the worst of the divisions, and maybe the East or, maybe the North would be the best, but I think each division seems to have like at least, there's at least 2 teams in each division that's pretty bad. Some are worse than others. And so, we were kind of laughing about Tampa being able to play Detroit, for however many games they get to play against. And, the same thing with, in like the West with, Vegas playing against San Jose or LA or Anaheim or, one of the lower kind of Western teams. But so it'll be interesting. I think it's not going to be as extreme as maybe maybe some people initially thought. I still don't really have a good gauge on where that's going to come out. But yeah, you're right. Like, the Leafs being able to play against, Ottawa, but, we just saw them, blow a 5-1 lead. So, it's hockey. That's the other thing. There's still going to be some, some kind of uncertainty and also just some randomness because the game is random. And, you see you're going to see probably Detroit beat Tampa. I think they already maybe have this year. And you'll see the Senators beat the Leafs. I mean, that's just how the game works. So we'll just have to see. I think we need a little bit more time before we can really say anything definitely.
For sure, it's an interesting season. Then with like how different and like short this season is, how many games do you think is going to be needed for the sample size to be large enough for the data on your website to be reliable to be used for like analysis?
Yeah, I think so. It again, kind of. I'm gonna put a pin in the whole different divisions because we don't really have a good, and I don't think anyone really knows how that's going to change things. It might not at all, but I think it's not really any different from the past seasons where generally, at least for some of our more kind of full purpose player evaluation metrics like GAR or XGAR, even RAPM. I think the same kind of we generally recommend that somewhere around about a quarter of a full season is where you can maybe start finding some signal in there and some of the issues. You have enough. There's enough minutes that players are playing. There's enough interactions between players and their teammates and competition that the model is starting to be a little more robust. So generally around the 20, maybe 25 game mark or maybe a little earlier, I think is where you can start asking some questions. And then we generally recommend, like stating anything with any kind of certainty is generally best around the halfway point in a full season. So which, in a 56 game season, and that's like 41 games. So we're already getting, that's like probably 3/4 of the way through or whatever this season. I think somewhere between the 20 to 40 game mark is where we can maybe start looking into things and finding a little bit more certainty in terms of, this is, I guess, speaking from like, which teams are good and which players are having good seasons, not necessarily thinking about, like long-term talent evaluation or something that would take in priors, which is, I think the other thing that's interesting is if models that include priors or have prior information that informs them also, I mean, it's not any different than other seasons, but by the end of a full 82 game season, you'll have a lot of data from the most recent season in that kind of model where this season is maybe not going to have as much. So it'll be interesting to see. I still think, to answer your question, that it's kind of somewhere between the 20 to 40 game mark is where I think we can kind of start to see some actual, results in the metrics and the models and get start to make some at least some observations about, what's going on.
I think it's just an interesting season. Everything you said is really interesting in the sense that just how different everything is going this year. Just everything's weird. Everything just seems to be a little bit odd.
Yeah, well, and then I guess the other thing we haven't mentioned yet is also the COVID impact on teams, and not even I guess one part being the fact that like the Wild, for instance, they just had their first game last night, and I mean I think they had at one point like 13 players who were all either in protocol or had maybe tested positive. I know that, like, for instance, Marcus Foligno he had, from the reports, it sounded like he was actually hit pretty hard. And there were some quotes from him after the game last night talking about how he just felt fatigued and tired. And, that could be, it's the actual health impact of the disease, but then also teams having to take like 2 weeks off or, take these long stretches, not to mention like goalies having these weird interruptions, which you hear about goalies having trouble. They want to get into a rhythm. Same thing with players. And I think this season is kind of, I mean, not to, I don't want to say anything like, definite, but it does kind of feel like we're getting to some point where this season might start to be a bit of an anomaly in terms of how we use it, in terms of projecting future years, and maybe having to put in. Obviously, it's going to have a general asterisk around it because of how unique and I guess almost unfortunate it is that it's kind of this shortened season with all of these interruptions and kind of player health impacts, but. That's definitely something that we'll have to see. I hope the league kind of does a little better job in terms of protecting players and improving the testing and the kind of the quickness of how they're able to quarantine or shut down and postpone games. I think they're already doing some good or taking some good measures, and I hope they kind of continue doing that further.
I agree with you. I don't think anyone wants to lose any more games from this season. But I'm going to shift course just a little bit. Recently, I'm not sure if you saw it because you guys are in America, but in Sportsnet Play showed in goals saved above expected model from Top Down Hockey. And I'm curious, what are your thoughts on like public analytics being shown more often within like these more mainstream sport broadcasts for hockey games in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's great. I don't know if I guess I haven't really noticed if it's been an increase, but I think that it's maybe in the last year or two I've noticed it a little bit more. I know there's several team broadcasts that seem to use natural stat tricks data. We've actually had some of our data up on a few broadcasts in various forums. Not a ton, but I think it depends on where the data is coming from. I think it's great. I mean, I think the one thing that can be I think that I guess you've seen this a little bit in baseball as well, where some of the broadcasts and have started introducing some of the more advanced stuff in baseball, or they have their Statcast data now, and so one of the gaps I think there with your kind of the general audience is having enough time when you're using that to kind of explain what it actually is doing. I from what I've seen, generally it's they kind of do a pretty good job. I think it's great. I kind of I think in that case, as long as the broadcasts are kind of linking back to things like Twitter handles and whatnot, that's definitely something that I think is really, really great in general, just to get more people involved and people asking good questions and more people doing work and just get people interested in the stuff. I think it's really great overall.
I think it's amazing. I also think that the biggest issue, I think we talked about this before, is that in regards to like these new analytics and these new statistics is the lack of understanding with them rather than the statistics themselves. I don't think people have problems with that, but lots of people don't seem to understand them to like such a great extent. And I think that public availability being put into the mainstream will help them a lot in terms of that general understanding, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think so too. It's important, I think, because I remember a lot about like my kind of path to getting here and how early on. I mean, I was like I think we maybe mentioned this last time or talked about it a little bit, but I'm not like by any means a lifelong hockey fan. I got into hockey relatively late compared to a lot of especially Canadians, but even American hockey fans. I didn't really start watching hockey until I was really even out of college. And I was always a baseball fan, and so I kind of had the luxury of and I was really big early on into the baseball kind of sabermetrics and the advanced stats there and learning about it. And I think so I kind of remember what it was like, because when I first started, I was more on message boards and forums, just kind of a standard fan lurking on Twitter and just kind of following stuff. I was a huge Wild fan early on, and And it is something that takes time. Like, it's not something that's necessarily easy to just say, oh, here's a stat that you've never heard of before. Somebody who's just watching the broadcast now, trust it, like now use it or believe it or even know exactly what's going on with it. So I think it's important with those. Like, it's really great because when you start to throw out new metrics like that or things that, I think inherently when you do like rankings like that, right? If one of those rankings shows someone who maybe isn't as who doesn't know much about the stat, but they see their favorite player is ranked really well, that's a really good way to get somebody interested. Like, well, I want to know what this is, or I want to figure out what's going on with this. And I think that's just all really, really great for kind of growing, I guess, the public. It's not really acceptance. I don't necessarily feel like it's, like that's kind of a different area, but in general, I think it's just all really great to get this stuff out there in the public.
I think it's great in terms of like expected goal stats and like goal saved above expected, because I feel like those sort of things, it's in the name. It makes sense to people naturally. At least it makes sense naturally to me. The idea of you're shooting from this location on the ice, that makes more sense. It'll be worth more if you're closer to the net and things like that, and then also like for goal saved above expected, that's something I think people are interested in for goalies. Like it naturally is something that people would be curious about. So seeing those in the broadcast, like as a first step, I think is pretty cool.
Yeah, I think it's definitely cool. I mean, and the other thing I think that it's not too much of a jump from some of the standard ways that I think broadcast or networks talk about hockey in general when they're talking about any kind of data, away from like, I know a lot of broadcasts have talked about, scoring chances for a while, and it's not too far, it's not too big of a leap to get from there to expected goals, because in a way scoring chances are just a very simple kind of binned look at XG, and looking at that, or even the way that, you hear anyone in hockey really on a broadcast talk about having, getting good chances or quality chances or good, high, dangerous shots, those kind of things. I think it's, it's like what you said is if the, it's a whole other thing talking about the nomenclature and, trying to get outside of or unpack the acronyms or, stuff like that. I think it'd be kind of daunting for some people, but it definitely helps when the name is kind of straightforward.
What's it called? There's the, like you were hinting at, like there's scoring chances, like the simplified XG model and things like that. There's something that's going around on Instagram now, is that analytics are the eye test, in the sense that they're showing exactly what you're seeing on the ice, even if sometimes you're describing it a little bit differently. So that's just something that's cool, I guess.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to think about it. I mean, that's how I've I mean, there are obviously some differences there. I think the one thing that, I don't really want to get too much into we don't really have time to get into the whole eye test versus analytics thing that's been, this season specifically with like Paul Maurice and so I'm trying to think, there was another team talking about it as well, but like just in general, I think that it's that's how I've felt about it, is that I think anybody would be kidding themselves to think that they can capture everything that that happens in a game. Not even, in one game, like we're not talking about a whole season, right? But in a single game, there's so many different events that happen and things that go on. And I think it's, for me personally, I just early on, it's like, well, there's no way I'm going to remember everything that goes on. I generally, with what ends up happening is that, your biases kind of inform what you're looking for and what you remember. And then that's the thing that you hold on to long-term. So I love to kind of treat the data like this as a way for me to kind of check what I'm watching. I love checking what I'm watching versus what the data shows and see if they line up. I think that's always been really fun for me.
I try to dream more, and that's actually something I've been trying to make in terms of like when I run my Instagram page, in terms of making that bigger series. We've taken games, like just taken games, watched them. I've evaluated, like trying to focus on a specific player and just comparing that to their analytics throughout the game. Of course, it's a smaller sample size, but just getting a sense of comparing their performance to what your eyes are seeing and to what the statistics are telling you. And generally speaking, I think that if you're focusing enough on one player, you'll end up getting something similar in that sense.
Yeah. Well, I think the other thing too is that I don't think it's very difficult to kind of start to connect the two and see how the models are working, or see how the how the data turns out at the end of a game, and then just think back on what you just watched and see why, or like what's going on. And I think it can be really informative to combine the two.
For sure. And I think when someone like Paul Maurice puts out his quote, it always ends with someone, it ended with him saying that, well, Wheeler has 10 points in 10 games. What more do you want from him?
I know.
He's
Yeah.
not even referencing his eyes anymore.
No, that's the case for as long as I've been following the sport and even baseball too. It's everybody has their data, they have their number that they want, and when the argument comes up, generally it's people still fall back on that. There are some people who specifically only talk about what they see, but those are rare. In Minnesota, there's a guy, Lou Nanne, who is an old North Stars. I think he was on the North Stars, and he was part of the. Some people might know him because he's in Miracle, but he was on the way back. I think he's still around. Big hockey guy, been around forever, and like the way he would talk about the game was just pure. He was purely just watching by the eye. And I feel like if you're gonna completely discount analytics and only go eye test, then you should probably only go eye test because any kind of data can influence what you're looking at, and most people know points, and so that's all they think about. So when they watch, they're just thinking about points, which leads to some other interesting outcomes.
That's very true. But I don't want to take too much of your time. I want to ask you quickly, who do you think's been the best player thus far in the season?
Oh, that's a good question. I think there are a lot of different ways to look at that. I'll just to cover myself because we're only, in the teens of players who played games this year. I think some of the candidates so far early on. I think that let's go forwards. I'll do maybe 3 forwards, 3 defensemen, and then maybe try and pick one, I suppose. But I think that Austin Matthews and Connor McDavid are having fantastic years in terms of forwards. I think some other players who have also been kind of and also Draisaitl. So like the 3 big ones. I mean, that's not it's not really surprising to say that. I think there are some younger players I think who are having who are good, but like DeBrincat is having a really great year. Nikolai Ehlers for the Winnipeg. Speaking of Winnipeg, is also having a fantastic year. I think in terms of defensemen, oddly, like some of our stuff right now early on, which I think is kind of a result of just some fluky stuff with Edmonton, is Darnell Nurse looks like he's having a pretty good year. We want to wait a little longer because there were some weird things going on with our models there, but I think, but I shouldn't. I just bring him up because Luke and I were just kind of chatting about him. But I think Cale Makar is probably right now the front runner. Him and in terms of like best defenseman, and then Jeff Petrie is also having a really really great year. So I think those two. I think are defensemen so far, and then kind of I don't know. It's kind of boring to say that Matthews and McDavid and Draisaitl are having really good years, but that's just kind of the case. I mean, Marchand, I think Brock Besser is off to a pretty good year as well, which is good to see. So, sorry I threw a bunch of names out there. I don't particularly feel that confident putting one name out there, I guess, right now. But if I had to pick, I think I'd probably go with either Matthews or McDavid. I think.
No worries. I don't think there's too many surprises thus far, like so far in the season, of course, who's been the best players. It's good to see McDavid. I think so far his defensive results have been a bit better this season. So seeing that come back has been pretty nice.
Yeah, it actually was really interesting. I was looking at this today because historically McDavid's been a player who's been all offense, no defense, or actually negative defense, and a lot of power play. But this year, and then great, obviously great penalty numbers. But he's been a very even like solid player throughout kind of pretty much every area of the game. Where when he was younger, I mean, he's still young, right? But when he was in his early seasons, he was almost all just unseen offense, like, that we've never seen before in terms of like even recently. I mean, and it would be, but he would still give up, on the defensive end. And this year, at least early, obviously still very early. I think it's difficult to say anything with certainty at this point, but he's been a very just consistent player throughout all of the components. And it's been very surprising to see his defense kind of turn around given what we know about it and how many minutes he's played. So yeah, that's, I think really great. Maybe we'll get some love back from the Oilers fans who left us with our Draisaitl disparaging comments last year before he turned around.
Because I'll be honest with you, the Rapim chart for Connor McDavid early in the season does look like the Pavel Datsyuk one thus far.
Yep. Yeah, he's kind of now looking more like kind of Couturier, O'Reilly, Bergeron, like those kind of really, really solid, just on everything. And whereas before he was, I don't really want to call him one-dimensional, but I think it's not too far it's not too big of a jump to say that he was just all offense, because that's what you would see. He wasn't known for his defensive game, but it's pretty great to see that so far this year, and we'll have to see. Obviously he's probably, he's the best player in the world, so we'll have to see if it continues.
Hopefully it does. I'm going to share my screen now to put up your guys' new player card model. Well, not a model, like your guys' new player cards
Yeah,
that
yeah,
you released over the off season. If you can you let me know if you see it?
yeah. I see it. Yeah.
All right, so here's Connor McDavid in his 2019-2020 season. As you can see, his defense is not as good as we were just taught as you were just talking about. So why don't you go ahead and just explain what are people seeing the second they open this aspect of your guys' website?
Yeah, so these were just kind of we have for a while we've kind of resisted this, but then also as we've thought about it more, thought that it is actually, if it's done well, which we think we did a pretty good job here, it can be really informative and help people kind of understand what some of the models are showing and how they look. Obviously you have the player information, and I'll get to the top numbers maybe in a minute, but the graphs on the bottom, those bar charts are kind of they're a combination of both our GAR and our XGAR models for both of the components. So we have even EB, or even strength, offense, defense, and then power play offense, shorthand defense, and penalties, which is kind of the core component that the core components that make up our WAR models, which is for those who might not be fully familiar. It's based on the ideas from baseball and wins above replacement, or goals above replacement, which is hockey's version of runs. And it's each of the components, we combine them, and they're also weighted. So these are 3-year, or you're on your 1 year. So this would just be McDavid's 1920 season in terms of how each of the components in an averaged form of GAR and XGAR are kind of show. And then we have the totals on the y-axis, so, or on the, in terms of the scale here, and those then kind of lead into those numbers at the top, which I think it's important to understand that these are percentiles, which are on a I think it's a nice, neat way to kind of convert this view of a player into one number. It also is something that people are familiar with. A lot of people are familiar with the kind of the NHL ratings, or the EA ratings, and that's kind of a similar idea. And so in this case, overall 94 from 1920, which actually was kind of a slight down year for McDavid, which is kind of funny to say that, really a lot of that was because he, as you can see, for defense in this case means that he was in the bottom 1% of defensive results at even strength, even though his offense was in the top 99%. We actually don't have these charts go up to 100 or 0. So he was at the top and bottom of both, which is a very funny result, which is kind of what I was mentioning earlier, is that so far this year, his defense has been much, much better. A lot of that, I think, just watching McDavid has been, well, I won't get into actually evaluating McDavid yet, but and then a little bit lower is just those kind of gray plots that look like a little blobs or whatever are distributions of time and ice at each of the strength states. So we have EV, power play, and shorthanded. And the dashed lines are showing the cutoffs, kind of an average estimate of where a first, second, third, fourth line, or maybe kind of fringe player would fall. And so you could see that the first one's kind of hard to see on the even strength, but McDavid plays more even strength time on ice than any forward in the league. So you can't even really see his line because it's so far right. And that's kind of the same thing in terms of his power play time on ice, is that he's just so far up, and he plays a little shorthanded as well, but it's kind of more, it's pretty much minimal, if any. And so that's a general overview. I could dive into the kind of what goes into the bar charts and a little bit more if but that's generally, this is kind of our attempt to do the best we can in terms of one view of how a player kind of grades out in a single season or in a 3-year span, which we also make available.
I think just to clarify, just to emphasize this point, these overalls here that people are seeing, these are not the equivalent of NHL ratings that people would see like while playing any EA game.
No, I said that because some people like to, because I believe, and maybe I should misspoke. I'm not by any means an expert on the EA games, because it's been a long time since I played them. I believe they have them on kind of 0 to 100 scales. Isn't that correct?
They're from 0 to 99, but it's the same notion.
Yeah, that's kind of that's what I mean. It's not that much different than just basically these have been kind of the overall rating is essentially combining the components below into one number and then rescaling on a 0 to 100 scale. So it's basically percentiles. Percentile charts have been around for a while. There's a few other people in the public who put out percentiles for players in terms of overall. That's kind of what these are. So comparing to the population, in this case, McDavid compared to forwards, all forwards in the league over generally the whole span of our data. That's kind of where he ranks, kind of within, or I guess within this chart would be one season. So it'd be within this one season. So yeah, and then the 3 years a combined weighting of prior performance. So you can see in this case, he's 99 overall, which basically puts him as the great, the best player in the league for this 3-year span as a forward.
All right. Thank you for coming on. I don't want to take too much of your time from
Yeah. I mean,
your
thanks for
evening.
having me. Yeah, I think it was a bit ago. I can't remember exactly when I was on, but as always, it's a pleasure. I mean, do you have any other follow-ups with the player cards, or was anything else that you wanted to just run by? I
No,
didn't mean to cut you off if I implied that.
no, no worries, not at all. I just wanted to get that out there to have you explain that basic sense to people, since I feel like it's like I've said before, I feel like the biggest issue in regards to having these models out there is people not always understanding what's going into them, and that causes confusion. So having you
Yeah.
explain that, I think, is the best way to clarify anything to people.
Yeah, and again, I mentioned this a little earlier, but it's one of I think the difficulty it is as an analyst is to explain things. Like some of the things make sense or they're easier to explain. It can be very difficult, we found, with models that are complicated. I mean, I don't want to sugarcoat it, is that these models can be very complicated. They have kind of complicated acronyms, RAPM or RAPM, regularized, adjusted, plus minus. For most people, it can be difficult to explain exactly what that is. And I try to give a general overview and summary. I would not to necessarily promote our stuff too much, but we do. If anyone is interested, as always, our DMs on Twitter are open at Evolving Wild. So if you have any questions about anything, feel free to reach out. We love answering questions from people who are just kind of inquiring about stuff. Also on our website, evolving-hockey.com, there's a references tab under the More dropdown that has links to articles and write-ups and explainers that cover a lot of these things and go much more in detail. I generally prefer to kind of keep it top level if I'm talking in a brief or I somewhat limited capacity where it's, not like a hockey conference where we're presenting, but, so we'd like to point people to those write-ups because it will we hope they answer most of the questions that people have. So, but as always, it's been a pleasure. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for coming on. You're always welcome to come on. Your website's amazing. Your content is amazing. And for you guys, for anyone who's not subscribed to Evolving Hockey, I 100% recommend it because it's an amazing website that helps a lot in terms of player analysis, evaluation on a season by season basis and a career basis too. So check out Evolving Hockey if you have not already.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, let me close the